Hi, everyone, and thank you for being here for another presentation as part of our virtual Southeast Greenways and Trails Summit. My name is Sarah Sanford, and I am the Virginia, North Carolina coordinator for the East Coast Greenway Alliance, and I'll be moderating today's presentation. First, a big thank you to all of the sponsors for the Southeast Greenways and Trails Summit. We really appreciate the patience of all these sponsors who have worked with us as we've transitioned from an in-person event to a virtual one. And also a thank you to the sponsors who are speaking as part of the summit today. I'm very excited to introduce this group from my home state of Virginia. The title of their presentation is The James River Park System Master Plan, Connecting Richmond. For those of you not familiar with the James River Park System, it is an amazing resource in Richmond, Virginia. I think probably one of the best urban parks in the country. And this group has some great lessons learned from the master plan project that they are going to share with us today. So at this point, I'm going to pass the mic, so to speak, over to them and just give us a minute here as I share their screen. Okay, so looks like we are good to go. Okay, so if you all want to go ahead and introduce yourselves, we can get started.
Sure, I'll start. This is Chris DeWitt with VHB. I happen to be in our Williamsburg office and had the pleasure during 2019 to manage the master plan effort for the James River Park system.
I'm Cassi Patterson. Cassi Patterson. I'm a transportation planner at VHB. I've been with VHB for about 1.5 years, and I was a planner on the James River Park Master Plan.
And I am Phil Riggan, and I work for PlanRVA, and I've been there since about 2016. I'm a transportation planner there, and most of my work is for bike and pedestrian infrastructure. And my part of this will be more about the connections into the James River Park. Glad to be here.
Okay, Cassie, we can go to the next slide. So this is Chris. I'll kick things off and I'll give a quick introduction to the project and a little bit of background on the park for those who aren't familiar with James River Park. I'll talk about the master plan in general, its mission and goals and objectives, and reference kind of the primary elements that the plan dealt with. And the plan really covered a wide range of topic areas. And today we'll really focus on the civic engagement effort, the natural resources component, and in particular, the trails and greenways context that's part of the plan. Cassie will get into more detail about the civic engagement, and Phil will talk about how the plan and how the park fit in with the regional greenway network, and in particular, the East Coast Greenway and the Ashland to Petersburg Trail. So the James River Park sits in the heart of downtown Richmond, and you can see the kind of the vicinity maps on the right side of this slide. Richmond is the capital of Virginia. The map in the lower right shows the city of Richmond with the James River essentially bisecting the city. And the park is 600 acres. It's right on the river, right in downtown Richmond. And you get down in, as Sarah said, down into this wonderful resource, and you almost feel like you're not in the city. You're down on the river, part of nature. It's a wild setting, a great counterpoint to the urban life in Richmond, Virginia. The park has been named by REI as one of the 6 best river parks in the United States. It's really an incredible asset and a natural component of the amenities in the city of Richmond. It's also a major economic driver for the city, bringing in over $30 million a year in revenue, tourist and park-related revenue to the city and to the region. And the park is managed by the city, by the Department of Parks, Recreation, and Community Facilities, and with a very limited staff of 7 full-time employees who oversee this 600-acre park. In addition to those full-time staff, volunteers are essential to the operation and maintenance of the James River Park. They donate thousands of hours a year to maintenance and cleanup and overall park management. There is a nonprofit group, Friends of James River Park, who actually spearheaded this master plan. And they worked with these other various recreational, outdoor, and nature organizations that you see here. Most of the folks on this list were part of the steering committee that helped guide the master plan process. The original master plan for James River Park was done in 1968, and until we did the new plan in 2019, that 1968 plan had not been updated. And in fact, there were key stakeholders, key supporters of the park who even raised the question of whether a master plan was necessary. The park has been functioning for a long time very effectively in a very flexible way. The staff are very dedicated. They have a great support network of volunteers, and operating without a master plan allowed them to operate in a very flexible way and respond to user needs. But in 2017, 2018, Friends of the Park came together and really decided that because of increasing visitation, because of strains on resources, really an update to that 1968 master plan was needed, and they decided to move forward with that. And again, we were fortunate enough to be brought on board and help them with that. The master plan was funded entirely with private funds. Friends of the Park embarked upon a fundraising campaign once they decided to do the master plan update. You can see the list of organizations and community foundations that contributed to the master plan. But again, it was a privately funded effort. Friends of the Park raised the money and were able to execute the master plan in that way. As I mentioned at the introduction, the master plan really covers a wide range of topics, and it's intended to be a 10-year decision-making document for Friends of the Park and for the city to look at maintenance, conservation, and improvement of the park over the next 10 years. We don't have time today to focus on all of these aspects of the plan, and again, we'll focus primarily on the natural resources, transportation, and trails and greenways elements. And we will also dig a little bit into the public involvement campaign that was really a critical part of the development of the master plan. The statement at the bottom of this slide is the mission statement for the master plan, and it really speaks to the park's role as a sustaining natural counterpoint to urban life. Again, the park is right in the heart of downtown Richmond. It provides active and passive recreation opportunities, conservation of the river environment, and really a great amenity for the city. But this overriding mission was developed early in the master plan process. It was tweaked as we worked through the master plan, but the steering committee felt that it was important that this statement guide the full development of the plan and all the recommendations that resulted from the plan. That mission statement is supported by 3 broad goals: providing equitable access to the park, focusing on environment and stewardship, and also focusing on education and potential expansion of the park. And within each of those broad goals, there are specific objectives outlined in the plan to provide diverse access to the park, to enhance the park's conservation efforts, and again, to focus on education, explaining to folks what an important part of the city and of the region the James River Park really is, and looking at the potential to expand the park. I mentioned that natural resources is a critical part of the park and of the master plan. And this really was something that emerged in the civic engagement process and through the steering committee discussions. Large portions of the park are covered by an existing conservation easement, and the plan recommends potential expansions of that easement. Another important part of the conservation activities that occur at the park involves the work of the invasive species task force. They work continuously to eradicate invasives and plant natives within the park. The plan also focuses on conservation of wildlife, forest cover, the river and its floodplain, and looking at ways to restore streams and wetlands and reduce erosion in the park. This is just one of the natural resources maps that is included in the plan, and it identifies specific areas where conservation and restoration activities might be possible. So areas to plant native species, to restore wetlands, to restore some of the streams that feed into the James River. There's also a particular focus in the plan on conserving some of the islands that are in the river as wild and natural areas. Transportation and access to the park was a really big component of the planning effort. The park, again, is in downtown and has limited parking. And we really, coming from the public process, coming through the steering committee, really tried to look at ways to encourage access to the park by means other than private vehicles. So the plan actually includes a prohibition of constructing new parking areas within the park, looks to cooperate with transit organizations, so the Greater Richmond Transit Corporation. Their transit service currently serves the park, and the plan suggests ways to work with GRTC to expand that service. The plan includes recommendations to allow public and/or private shuttle service to the park. And in particular, the plan includes recommendations to improve neighborhood access. So looking at sidewalk, bike path, streetscape connections to get people from adjacent neighborhoods into the park without having to drive. As we looked at ways to do that, we started with the city's existing bicycle master plan. A great deal of work and public involvement had gone into the development of that plan, and we wanted to reflect that to provide additional support for implementation of that plan, and also to use consistent terminology. So recommendations for bike lanes, sidewalks, shared use paths. We wanted that to be consistent in our plan with the city's bicycle master plan. So we really used that as the framework. We did identify some additional connections to key locations and to key neighborhoods to get people into the park. But we started with that existing bicycle master plan as a basic framework. And this is just a zoom in of the map from the previous slide, showing some of the specific recommendations for things like bike lanes, buffered bike lanes, shared use paths, streetscape improvements. Again, looking at ways to connect the dense urban downtown to the James River Park and allow people to access the park without having to drive. So in addition to those neighborhood connections and the multimodal improvements, another thing that emerged from the planning process as critically important was recognizing regional greenway connections, regional trails that also help people get to the park, excuse me, and how the park fit into that system. So the plan fully supports funding and implementation of the regional greenways plan. You can see there's a long list of facilities here that include the East Coast Greenway. Phil's going to talk a little bit more about some of this, but the park also connects to facilities like the Virginia Capitol Trail. So there are major greenway networks that connect in one way or another to the park, and the park's master plan explicitly supports the implementation and funding of those projects. The plan also identifies key east-west connections, so greenway connections along the river to connect the various parcels that make up the park. That 600 acres is spread out in the city along the river, and the plan recommends ways to connect those locations by greenways. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to, oh, no, sorry, not yet. So the multimodal network map on the left you've seen before, and again, that really emerged from the city's bicycle master plan. You can see the greenways and trails map on the right that focuses more on that regional network that I just talked about. And these two really work together to form a multimodal system to help get people to the James River Park. And this is just a zoom in of the Greenways map, really highlighting the east-west connections along the river to connect the various locations within the park. And now with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cassi to talk about the civic engagement process.
Thanks, Chris. So this project had really intensive public involvement, so much so that city leaders praised it as being one of the greatest amounts and displays of public involvement for any Richmond plan the city has seen. Now I'm going to go through what we did and why it was such a success. The plan really was a stakeholder-driven plan. We had a very involved and motivated steering committee, which consisted of individuals from organizations involved with the park and multiple leaders of volunteer groups associated with the park, which included the Friends of the James River Park, who raised the funds for the plan. You can see the images on the right. That's our steering committee after our very first steering committee meeting. We also had a technical committee that was made up of city staff who could lead us down a path of success for making it a city adopted plan. Another stakeholder were residents, both from within the city and in the surrounding counties, who were frequent visitors of the park. So how did we engage all of these stakeholders and gather input? Well, we started off with arranging neighborhood meetings. Richmond is made up of 9 districts, and we had meetings within each of those districts to really meet the people where they live, work, and play, and to make it convenient for them to become involved. We also held one citywide meeting at the end of our district meetings. This was for all the residents of the city and the region to come out one last time and provide their ideas and input for the master plan. Each of the meetings consisted of a presentation and then an open house style engagement period. At the meetings, we had a series of maps that were divided into topic areas so that attendees could walk around and voice and write down concerns or recommendations for those specific topic areas. And those topic areas were trails and greenways, natural resources, transportation access, and park activities. A creative and resourceful method of comment documentation was to laminate the maps. That prevented us from having to print multiple maps for each meeting. And we really encouraged the attendees to write on the maps within whiteboard marker so we could document the comments, erase the marker, and then reuse the maps for each consecutive meeting. We also had the volunteer groups in the steering committee host pop-up meetings around the city and at popular river spots where frequent park users go. These meetings really helped to reach the populations that would not regularly attend public meetings or become involved in a citywide plan. We also had an online survey through SurveyMonkey, which was very successful, and it gained over 2,300 responses from all over the region. The survey consisted of demographic questions, as well as multiple choice, ranking, and open-ended questions. We provided the survey in both English and Spanish, the 2 most spoken languages in Richmond. In order to be able to quantify the vast amount of open-ended questions we reviewed each response and then summarized and categorized the comments. After all the initial input was gathered and the master plan was drafted, we submitted one final online survey to the public to have the responders reflect and give their opinions on the overall plan, as well as to prioritize the strategies we had drafted. And now I'm going to go over how we use that input in the plan. The input really was the main driver in forming the recommendations and strategies for the plan. You can see here some of the questions from the online survey. And while you may not be able to read the specific inputs, you can see how we received this information and how it could guide us in making recommendations to shift certain behaviors, such as auto dependency to access the park, and enhance specific areas of the park or certain topics, such as trail use. The input we received from the second online survey that tasked responders to prioritize strategies would shape the short-term, mid-term, and long-term actions in the final master plan. And I'm going to pass it over to Phil to discuss the regional context of the East Coast Greenway.
Thank you, Cassie. First of all, I wanted to go back to one of the slides that Chris had mentioned with a lot of the Greenway connections. I am a regional transportation planner. Like I said, I'm mostly with bike and ped infrastructure, but I work with all the 9 localities that make up the Richmond region as part of my job with PlanRVA. We are the MPO, so we help distribute funds, federal funds that are requested for bike and pedestrian infrastructure projects. But among these connections through the James River Park, there are connections that I will show a few images of later, connecting to the Virginia Capitol Trail, which is a 52-mile trail between Richmond and the Williamsburg area. We are right now working on a regional project with the Virginia Department of Transportation that's currently called the Ashland to Petersburg Trail. It's the atptrailstudy.org website. I realize now I did not include that in one of my slides, but the whole goal with this was to prepare, actually, Cassie, if you'll go to the next slide. The VDOT, Virginia Department of Transportation, put together this Ashland to Petersburg Trail study, and there are 7 different localities, as you see listed here, that participated in this. It's a trail that would connect between Ashland and Petersburg, and we're currently going through a naming process. I won't spill the beans on any of them, but we're really trying to find something that's unique to the Richmond area, and about halfway through that process right now and haven't gone public with it yet. But Ashland and Petersburg, there's 2 cities named in there, and the towns and counties in between would like to see something that's a little less specific to those localities. But anyway, we're having some fun with that right now. But let's go ahead and get into the study. So VDOT took about a year to do their study, and they studied 6 different corridors between the town of Ashland and the city of Petersburg. They're using some multi-use path opportunities. They were using some on-road, or really in some of the more suburban areas, how can they separate that into a multi-use path? That's kind of their goal, was the multi-use trail. In the more urban areas, it's about how with road diets or roadway reconfigurations, they could reappropriate some of the paved areas. But yeah, like I said, 7 regional localities. The study estimated at about $106 million for the entire build out, which included 3 major rivers to cross in the region, and 2 of them would require an extra bridge to be built. We'll go over one of the bridges that's already been constructed, which has been very beneficial. But yeah, all of that study was done in preparation for smart scale applications that would be coming up, this spring. So we're right in that phase. Like I said, there were 6 different corridors that were identified and studied. Some of them were along more current planning efforts, like say with the green line as it moves. You might see in that lower left-hand corner of the screen towards Pocahontas State Park, where we have a regional ride center, and that's a major state park and destination for our region. But after they studied all of these different corridors, and some of that green line does follow the current East Coast Greenway path, but the eventual decision was with the orange line, which I showed on a previous screen. That orange line is almost entirely unique from the current East Coast Greenway designation. So this would be, hopefully, if East Coast Greenway chooses to do so, would be an entirely new pathway for the East Coast Greenway as it passes through Richmond. So I want to drill down a little bit closer now as we get into the James River Park and how this relates to our presentation today. That, as I mentioned, we have the Potterfield Bridge, which is in the map there, the little yellow and black crossing of the James. The study itself was, the Ashland-Petersburg Trail study was to focus on evaluations of existing conditions, environmental resources, and trying to find areas that would cause the least damage to the environment. There are some existing railway corridors or some former railway corridors that are included, and one of them is a streetcar line that has been dormant for about 80 years. It's mostly a power line. There's another section of railway in Chesterfield. So a lot of this would be hopefully repurposing to already graded and not scaled, but land that would be easily adjusted to bike and trails. But yeah, the entire goal through this, hopefully for the East Coast Greenway purposes, would be a realignment of the East Coast Greenway through the Richmond region. So the Potterfield Bridge opened in 2016 and cost about $11 million. The crossing is a renovation of a former dam, and it was the first part of the riverfront plan, riverfront master plan, the first major project for that. But it is part of the James River Park, and gosh, as soon as that thing opened, we had thousands of people coming. Even though it was very cold winter time, people were flocking to this bridge as a instant social media attraction. It was in December of 2016, and everybody was all of a sudden putting their Christmas photos together or their New Year's celebrations along that bridge, because it's lighted at night and it shows a really beautiful it has a beautiful view of the downtown skyline mixed with the river, and it's a unique position, so very attractive position, but it is a bike and pedestrian only bridge, so which is unique to Richmond. So now some of these images here, you can see in that lower left, gentleman on the bike. The bridge is about, excuse me, the span width is about 12 foot across. It is lighted with LED lights at night, but you're only about 12 feet above the river. Very close, intimate spot there. And on each end of the bridge, there's some different attachments, should say, approaches into Browns Island and some of the areas of Manchester on the south side. You can see these rings here. That's a sculpture project that was a part of the south side. But we'll go to the next slide and I'll show a little bit more of the Potterfield Bridge area. So it's a metal bridge, metal decking. So as you bike across it or walk across it, it does have like a little bit of a, you can hear that clicking of metal as you go. But the purpose with the railing and everything is much visibility of the river as you can get. In that lower right-hand picture there, it kind of shows, this is from the much taller Lee Bridge that crosses the James. But you can see the span there, it's, a third of a mile across the river. It's you can really get out into the river, and the rapids are right there. It's a beautiful spot for Richmond. But this is that central crossing that would be a part of that Ashland to Petersburg Trail as it passes through the James River Park. So I'm going to roll through with the next few slides some of the things. Browns Island is in the upper right corner, upper left corner. And we have Tredegar, which is one of the main connections for the Richmond National Battlefield Park, Civil War site. On the south side, you have a Manchester Bridge area and the connections into the south side. You can keep going, please, Cassie. So the big change with this whole Ashland to Petersburg Trail we are trying to realign the trail through more multi-use paths, more parks, connecting through some more attractions. And so I just want to walk you through some of the images as we go from the lakeside community through Bryant Park and Northside toward downtown. So Bryant Park here, you're already talking about an area that is known for cycling. Bryant Park was a biking destination more than 100 years ago, when Richmond was really just starting to grow. And you have some connections from Bryant Park into the north side with bike trails already. You can see that lower left corner has an East Coast Greenway sign on there with all these other bike signs. Some of these trails, or I should say bike lanes, are not protected, but we're still working on improving some of that infrastructure as well. So as we go from the Bryant Park area through Northside, there is a little section of this on Hermitage Road that is currently East Coast Greenway, but that's about the only section of the nearly 40-something miles that we're talking about between Ashland and Petersburg. Almost all of the rest of this would be, if East Coast Greenway agrees with this, a realignment of that. So we go through the Brooklyn Parkway, that's a road that's already got about a mile of, it's called a road diet or roadway reconfiguration. So we go through Northside, we get toward the Virginia Union area. Next slide, please. Virginia Union University here, they've got bike lanes in that area, and some of this would also be some roadway reconfiguration where we would have on Brook Road, there's going to be new bike lanes coming in very soon. That's at upper right-hand corner and the lower right-hand. This railway crossing has been a little bit contentious just because, you're crossing a railway, but people have been biking over this for a very long time. We're just talking about having it be where you actually have a lane leading up to the crossing. And so then we continue from here into the Jackson Ward area. This is Jackson Ward is a historic neighborhood, mainly known for African-American history and some of the more glamorous historic periods of Richmond. There's a lot of old homes and infrastructure that is that remains, and so hopefully what we're trying to do is just have roadway reconfiguration through this. That lower right-hand image, there's going to be a cycle track put in on First Street that would connect along, because it's a one-way street that would allow two-way traffic for bikes. This is continuing as we head down towards Browns Island area. But let's go through Jackson Ward. Like I said, a very historic district. There's a lot of an old church there that's very famous, but they've got a very colorful, there's a lot of murals that have been added. And that upper left image of Major Taylor was done ahead of the Richmond 2015 cycling UCI championships. So, a lot of it was celebrating cycling. And anyway, Jackson Ward would be a beautiful place as this trail continues through. And we're now on our way down toward Browns Island and where the Potterfield Bridge is. But yeah, some of this is already protected bike lanes. This is 2nd Street. And the two images on the right, on the upper right, you're at the top of Browns Island Way, which is a connection from 2nd Street down to the riverfront, James River Park, and Potterfield Bridge. It's a very steep hill, so there's been some discussion with folks, is this really the hill we wanted to choose for people to go up and down for the trail? Thing is, it's low traffic. It is steep, but we'll see how many people end up having to walk up and down the hill because it is pretty steep. But hopefully, it's still low traffic and protected. So we continue on to connect with, again, here's the Potterfield Bridge. So again, we're trying to shift, hopefully, the East Coast Greenway, the Ashland to Petersburg Trail, along a much safer route hopefully create an opportunity for more novice or intermediate riders to feel safe. Young children can feel safer to ride some of this trail, and to relieve some of that vehicular traffic and the parking congestion that Chris was talking about in his presentation. The Potterfield Bridge is lit at night, which is different from the current route just west of there over Belle Isle. That bridge it's a beautiful bridge, but it is not lit at night, and technically it closes at night as well. So, and then along the south side there, and this is something that Chris had mentioned in his part of the presentation as well, the missing link trail from the south side connecting to Belle Isle, that would really provide this entire greenway connection within the James River Park to flow between, almost the Boulevard Bridge area. You're talking about 2 or 3 miles worth of trail that could be connected if we just had that one small section. Right now, the biggest interference is there's a railway line with ballast right up to the shoreline of the river. So we almost have to go out into the river to make that final connection there for that missing link. But the whole goal, again, is to provide more greenway connectivity through the James River Park to connect, for cyclists, pedestrians, runners, everyone. More non-vehicular traffic in a very beautiful area.
And that wraps it up for our presentation. Sarah, we'll turn it back over to you for closing.
Thank you so much. That was a great presentation, and I hope everyone who's watching today enjoyed hearing more about the James River Park System, Richmond in general, and bike and pedestrian infrastructure. If you have any questions for these presenters, their contact info is on the screen here. You can take a screenshot of this image, or you can just reach out to any of the East Coast Greenway staff, and we can connect you with any of the presenters. If you are engaging with the summit on social media, you can use the hashtag Greenway Summit. You can see here that Phil does have a Twitter account, so if you're a Twitter person, you can interact with him on there. He has lots of stuff about bike pedestrian infrastructure in Richmond in general, hiking, biking, all that. So with that, I'll say thank you again for attending, and thank you for being here for the summit and supporting East Coast Greenway.